Okay, there we go. All right. First of all, do we have any questions from the week before that we did as is versus residential? Because I had some questions since then. I want to make sure I took the chance to answer any. Do we have any questions from that, guys? You guys have to talk since I'm not in front of anybody. So, no.
I
Yes.
don't have any questions, Carrie.
Oh, thank you, Miss Linda. Okay, great. So, just wanted to go over just briefly a couple, you know what, let's share the screen too. Okay. And you guys can all see my screen, right? You see the dot loop?
Yes.
Thank you. Awesome. So we're going to go right on into a couple different things. So here's our as is contract. We're going to download that one, open it. And then we're going to go over here and download the residential really quickly. One thing that keeps popping up, and it is cracking me up, thank God it's not you guys, because it would make me want to cry. And I'm going to show you. Is you see here, guys, on the back of either contract, there's been a change, as you guys all know, to the, let me make sure this is downloaded. Okay, there it is. Oh, I don't like either. To the broker compensation, right? Can anyone tell me what the GG is? Can someone hop on, unmute, and say, Carrie, this is what the GG is? Can someone do that for me? Anybody? Anyone feel so brave to say this is what the GG is? Anybody?
When you're not sure what the compensation is.
I love that you say that, but just that is exactly what it is, Marima. That's why you use it. That is exactly right. I have seen so many times over the last week, actually, when people are using the GG alone. Guys, GG cannot be used alone. And we're just going to look at it one more time because I feel like there's still confusion. I really like to say it's not for my people. So, but just in case, how do we look at it again? We go over here to templates, Florida Interactive Forms. Once that's clicked, we can just hit GG. Let's do GG. What is happening? Did I not? Oh, Florida Interactive Forms has got to be clicked. GG. And it pops up. So there you go. And we're going to see here. It even says it in the name, seller's agreement with respect to buyer's compensation. But let's just read it together, shall we? This contract is contingent upon one, seller's broker and buyer's broker, or seller and buyer's broker, right? You have to pick one. Executing a compensation agreement with terms acceptable to buyer within blank, if left blank 3 days after the effective date. So if the compensation agreement described herein, so what does that mean? There has to be one, right? Okay, so I'm just saying, and delivered within the time period, then the buyer has 3 days after to deliver written notice to the seller terminating this contract, and the buyer shall be refunded the deposit. So this is saying that the
That
buyer
the buyer.
Okay, that the buyer has 3 days to decide if the compensation agreement that was given in, which is either the seller's broker or the seller and buyer's broker, right? Whichever box they check, which we're going to look at that because there's still confusion on that. This means that they have 3 days or whatever you select here to make sure that everybody agrees with those terms. But if you just sent a GG, or my favorite, you just check the box. I've seen this too this week. You got nothing. You have no compensation agreement and you have no contingency. Is everybody clear on that? So the GG in and of itself means absolutely nothing. And with simply the GG, it still means absolutely nothing because it's only contingent. It's only making the seller's broker and buyer's broker or seller and buyer's broker. It only makes that one particular document contingent. Everybody clear on that? So what is that document? Let's take a peek and look at that. And again, under our listing agreement, it's under listing agreement. Listing folder. The heck is listing agreement? Admit, I'm gonna keep adding people. That's condo. Buyer. Listing folder, residential. Here's one. Why is there nothing in here? Oh, because I still have GG. There we go. Here we go. All sorts of goodies in the listing folder, right? Compensation agreement. Let's take a peek. This is what it's making contingent. Compensation agreement, seller or seller's broker to buyer's broker. This is the one. So here on either contract, you have to check other and write in compensation agreement. You have to incorporate that into here. And if you want to use GG with it, then you have to check GG and actually put that into the contract. But without that, GG is useless. And let us just look at this again, because there's still confusion on how to use this. You have to select either is it seller to buyer's broker or is it seller's broker to buyer's broker? You make an election here. If it's one of our listing agreements, again, what do? We do, which one, guys? Anybody? Anybody? Seller's broker, right? That would be if we checked 10A, right? Under 8 in the listing agreement, it's our commission. And under the section 10 is what have they decided to do on the buy side commission. If we select 10A, that means they've given us the opportunity to pass out commission, right? That would mean you check seller's broker here. If they've said, we don't know, we're just not going to decide on a commission, we'll decide it at the time, then you have to check this, seller to buyer's broker, because they're paying it direct. Unless you've modified that listing agreement and changed it at the time of contract, you're going to select seller. Y'all with me on that? Is there any questions? So this is ours, 10A. And there's no time ever that the buyer's broker decides what this is going to be. It's not a decision of what the buy side wants to put in. They're going to put it in if they don't know. They're going to guess, right? Because they don't know. But they don't decide which one they want to offer because it's based upon our listing agreement. So when I hear EXP agents, my favorite, say, Carrie, our company only works with seller to buyer's broker. Well, that's nice. You're telling me what you do on the list side, right? But that's what you control, how you work with your customer on the list side. You don't control how we work with our customer on the list side. Does that make sense, guys? Because that's what they're telling us. They don't know what our agreement is with our customer. Is everybody clear on that? So this has to do with how we have signed our listing agreement. And if they're on the buy side, they don't know. Okay, does that make sense? So it's either seller or seller's broker. So if you're guessing on your side and you say, hey, Brady, is your seller giving compensation? And you say, well, put in an offer and let's see, right? Let's say that's what he said. We don't know. That means he could have selected 10C, doesn't that? Right? You have two choices, guys. At that rate, you have two choices. You could come in and check A, seller to seller's broker, or now you can use FF. Y'all with me? Carrie, what is the FF? Thank you all for asking. I'm so glad we're playing this game today. We're going to look in and we're going to take a little peek at an FF, which we're going to come down here to Florida Interactive Forms, and we're going to type in FF. Oh, for the love of God. Florida Interactive Forms. FF. Why is this not going in here? FF. Why is FF not going in? FF. There it is. Credit to buyer's broker. Let's take a look. So, how is the FF different? Does anybody want to share? Anybody have a thought? Everybody's so quiet on Zoom. Zoom is just so painful. Okay, well, since no one is playing my game, I will play it by myself as usual. Okay, so this is the FF, and this is how it's different. The FF is only the buyer and the seller. We don't talk about brokers at all. Brokers are not even part of this game. So this is the difference with the FF. It is first part a complete disclosure that the buyer has entered into a separate brokerage relationship and a separate agreement with it's called a buyer broker agreement, which we all are very familiar with. This is simply a disclosure. And then they're saying at closing, the seller agrees to credit the buyer the sum below with the understanding that the buyer may pay part, all, or some, or none to that for that part of it. Okay. And so now you're saying what part? What are we going to pay? So they're asking for either a flat sum, a percentage, or a percentage plus. So, for example, if you wanted to say 2.5%, 3% plus, oh, I don't know, 4.95. You could do that. This is where that plus is for, right? That's what that's for. So this is what this is about. And now they're saying if the credit exceeds what the buyer is allowed to get because of contributions from the lender, which just happens, guys, because sometimes the buyers ask for more than they're allowed to get. Now we have to make an election. What's going to happen with the overage? Let's say they say they want 3% of the purchase price, but due to the debt to income ratio, due to what they're already getting, maybe whatever the case is, they can only get 2%. What's going to happen to the extra 1%? Well, it depends on what we check here. Either the balance of the credit will be paid by the seller direct to the buyer broker, or the credit will be reduced to the amount allowed by the buyer's lender. So if I'm representing a buyer, why in the world would I select that one? It's like, why did I bother to negotiate the 3% to begin with? Right? That would be silly. I would always want to say the rest would go to the seller, paid to the buyer's broker, right? Hello? Are you with me, guys? But this one, now notice what it doesn't say. I want to point out something here. It doesn't say if left blank. There is no box for dummies here. It doesn't say if left blank, blah, blah, blah. So this one you got to actually think about and you actually have to fill it out. So if you're going to plan to use this one, please actually read it and think about what's going to happen if the rest of the amount that you put up here, they can't receive it because of the lending requirements. Okay. Everybody with me on that? And then it also says, if in the event the credit amount exceeds the limit allowed by the buyer broker agreement, right? Because we all know that could be a problem, the amount will be credited, whatever's allowed under the buyer broker agreement. Now, this is where it gets interesting because remember, it also says all part or some might go to the buyer broker agreement. So what if I said 3%, but the buyer broker agreement said 2%? Well, the buyer could say, well, I'm not getting all this money to go to the buyer. I'm getting some to go to my closing costs and some to go to the buyer broker agreement. So this is where you have to be very clear. If you're using this, the buyer has to be very clear what they're putting towards you and what they're putting towards the buyer broker agreement if your agreement doesn't match. So the easiest way to make sure that this is never an issue or a conflict is to make sure your buyer broker agreement always matches. Does that make sense? And then FF does not modify the buyer broker agreement. So it can't say, well, just because you've negotiated a higher amount here, you've got the 3, but your buyer broker agreement says 2.5. This does not automatically negotiate and change your buyer broker agreement. You actually have to do that. You actually have to modify the buyer broker agreement, if that makes sense. Oh, Anna Maria. Good to see you this morning. Good to see you this morning. Okay, so that is the difference between the FF and the difference between the compensation agreement, the regular compensation agreement, which let's go finish looking at the regular compensation agreement one more time just to make sure, because I still feel like people are like, what the heck is the difference? How did it change? There really is no other changes in it. Let's go ahead. And here it is, compensation agreement. Again, we said if it's seller to buyer's broker, that would be because you checked 10C or you don't know what they selected. Seller's broker to buyer's broker if it's 10A, right? So, and then the buyer's broker, that is just the name. So you're not making an election there. You just have to put it in, right? The property address, that part's the same. This part is the one thing that's not is different than the last one is the property listed or not listed. And that would be in the case of you went and procured a sale. You knew that your buyer was looking for a home in Golden Oak and you were trying to find a specific property. The property is not listed. And so you procured a for sale by owner, if you will, that type of thing. This is when you would select the properties not listed. You didn't use an exclusive for sale listing agreement, perhaps. You used a commission agreement. You're going to check properties not listed. Does that make sense? We never had that before. This is the change on this form. Other than that, the rest of this is identical to the other form that we used to use. So it is the compensation takes effect when fully executed. And what makes executed has been delivered to all parties. So it's signed and delivered, right? And it remains in effect if left blank for 15 days, but it will extend past the date if there's any extensions that happen in the contract. So if your contract continues because there's been extensions due to inspections or walkthroughs or whatever, this will automatically extend. You don't have to keep extending this, okay? So that's normal. Same situation here, flat rate, although they switched the positioning. This one's the flat rate. This is the percentage plus whatever you wanted to do. And this is other, so you can write in extra terms in here. Please do not start getting fancy because every time you guys write in some extra terms, a lot of times they're contradictory and that makes it harder to get you paid. So be very careful and always talk to me before you write anything in. So this is, again, just legal arbitration stuff. What happens? I've gotten this question a lot, Carrie, if they don't want to arbitrate, do we not sign it? No, if they don't want to arbitrate, listen, we're still going to sign it. We always recommend arbitration. It's very expensive to get into lawsuits, right? It's very expensive. The people who are always adamant, oh, my company, they don't arbitrate. They don't even know. I'm going to tell you, unless you're talking to the broker, the people who are constantly telling you that have no clue. They probably don't even know what arbitration is. Let's be honest. So the reality is, it's not that big a deal. We would prefer people want to arbitrate because arbitration is a much easier process. It's much less money. It's much quicker. It keeps relationships better. But again, I guarantee you the people who are saying that don't even know what the difference between arbitration, and they probably don't even know if you don't arbitrate what happens. I guarantee you ask them that. Really? Okay. So if you don't arbitrate, what goes next? What happens next if there is a problem? And they probably don't know. That means that their company would have to sue us in the court of law. And let me ask you, how many times has their company sued someone else in the court of law? Miami happens a lot, but it doesn't happen very often here in Orlando. So, whatever. We have attorneys. We pay people, so we don't really care, is the point, right? So whatever. So that's why I'm going to say if somebody is like adamant, oh my God, can we do the deal? They won't sign the arbitration. We don't care that much. Does that make sense? Okay, and then seller's broker is compensating buyer's broker. We're just initialing, that's all the same normal stuff. And then you're signing here as well. And again, you can sign in my stead. Any questions on that? Because this has come up probably no less than 3 times this past week alone. So I just want everybody to be very clear about that. But again, when you are using the FF, there's still a place for that in the contract. If you are using the compensation agreement, you still have to incorporate it. Check and incorporate that into the contract. You don't have to use a GG. If everybody is on the same page with what the compensation is, you don't need to make it with a GG to make sure that you're making a contingent. What are you making a contingent for if you've all agreed? And if you've incorporated it into the contract, now it's part of the contract, right? So why do you need to add the GG? The GG is merely you don't know what they're going to go ahead and make sure, or you're asking for more. They said they're going to do 2%. You're coming in at 3%. Then you need to add the GG because now you're going to give time to make sure that you can come to terms. That's the point of the GG. Is everybody clear on that? Okay. Another one I want to go through before we get into other parts of the contract is a kick-out clause. I've had a lot of questions on the kick-out clause. So the kick-out clause is my favorite. If you are dealing with somebody, you're on the list side, for example, somebody has a home to sell contingency, they want to put in an offer, and the home to sell contingency gives your seller an opportunity to have some, I'm not going to say a lot, but some type of not power, but a little bit, just a little bit of power in the power play. I'll give you a power play in the contract. So let's take a look. We're going to go down to Florida Interactive Forms. We're going to type in kick out. Anybody on the call use it before? Oh, you guys are so much fun today. Oh, just so
I
much.
used it this weekend, Carrie.
Thank
Carrie, I'm
you.
to talk, so I just muted.
That's great. Thank you, Maria. Yes, Shandy, you did use it this weekend, didn't you? Did they actually let you put it in there, Shandy? Did he accept it at the end or no?
Yes, we have it.
It's a freaking miracle. That guy
Quite
is
a fight.
perfect example of somebody who has no clue what he's doing. The contract he submitted was a mess and he is a moron. But anyway, what? Yeah, but he's in Daytona, and so that tells us pretty much everything. Anyway, moving on. So here we go. Kick out clause. Seller will have the right to continue to show the property. Now, I want to talk about that very briefly. We do not, I repeat, not have a status that's called active with contract. I know y'all wish we did. I know back in the day, well, I know Omcar used to. I don't know if actually Stellar ever did, but we don't. Okay. There is no active with contract. You cannot keep your home active while you have a contract. You cannot not put it pending. If you have a contract, the ruling, and this is another thing that came up this weekend. No, it's just what people like to push and pull and get you to feel like you're violating MLS rules. It's so fun. MLS is business days. The ruling is you must be pending within 2 business days. Are we all good with that? So if your home pens over the weekend, do you have to rush and pend it? Let's all think about
No.
that. No, no. Mm-mm. If it pended on Friday, right? When was it? So it was a pending Friday. You only have Monday and Tuesday, actually. So we're good, right? We don't even have to pend it to the following Tuesday. We're super good, really. We probably could even push it to Wednesday, to be honest. And realistically, now it's very hard to get an MLS violation on that. I mean, if we waited till Friday, we probably could get a violation, but not to say we would. We really do like to keep in compliance, but it is 2 business days. We all good on that one? Contracts are calendar days, but MLS is business days. Okay. So moving on. So they have the right to show the property, but it's showing as pending, and we check a box that says accepting backup offers. Now, let's talk about that for another second. Can we always accept backup offers?
Yes.
Not really. I love that.
Unless the
Yeah.
seller tells us not to take backup,
And how would we know that, Brady? That's good.
they would tell us
How would they tell us?
in writing.
Which would be where? Where would
In the
it?
listing
help me.
agreement.
In the listing agreement, right? So I'm going to keep my kick out clause there. We're just going to go to the listing agreement real quick because you know what? I've asked a lot of people this too, and they're like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about, Carrie?" I'm like, "Oh, Jesus, Lord above, yeah." So we're just going to visit for fun. We're going to visit the listing agreement because there's 2 very important things that you guys. I ask you oftentimes, and you're like, "Well, I get the dead stare, huh?" And so just in case I ask you. And yeah, I don't want to make sure I don't get the dead stare. So there's 2 things I want you always to know about. That I want to know, what did you check on these 2 spots? And I just zoomed right past them. Here they are. Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Did I zoom past it again? Yes, I must have. Where is it? Lockbox. Ah, here it is. It is line 76, my favorites. Verbal offers. So sellers benefit and releases broker persons working through broker and brokers, realtor association board. So sellers releasing all the board and everybody from all damages that occur. And if we check this, the seller does not, they're allowing us to withhold verbal offers. What do you guys think I feel about that? Do you think I like verbal offers or I don't? No.
You don't.
I don't like verbal offers. I always think you should always check this. Verbal offers, I'm going to tell you, no good comes from verbal offers. Verbal offers is not trying to come to terms on an offer to get it in writing. That's not a verbal offer. That's you two, you and the listing agent, you and the seller, the buyer's agent, trying to hammer out the details. That's not a verbal offer, right? That is like working through an LOI. That's like trying to come around, like trying to come out through the details so that they can put the offer in writing and you tell the seller, right? But when someone tells you something and you run and tell the seller, that's a verbal offer. That's bad news bears, because that is never going to be good. Because whatever they tell you, it's nothing until you get it in paper. Does that make sense? Once it's in paper, I guarantee it's probably not going to look anything like they told you to. And then who looks like the liar? Yeah, it's just not good. But Carrie, you said it was going to be 5 million and it's 2 million. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Yeah, it's just not good. Don't do it. So when somebody says, "Oh, I'm putting in an offer and it's verbal," I would say, "I'm sorry, the seller has elected not to receive verbal offers. You must put it in writing." The other thing is, too, if they won't sign a broker buyer agreement with you, that's another great way to get around that, too. Okay, withhold all offers once the seller accepts a sales contract for the property. Do not check that. If you check this, then you're not receiving backup offers. So sometimes you get a little check happy and you go check, check, and then now you can't accept backup offers. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't change it, right? But now you got to modify your listing agreement. Now, let me ask you, how many times do sellers actually read their listing agreements? Well, I'd hate to say probably not many, but does not matter. The seller should be aware, and you really should have gone through with the seller what they have signed, because these are really important things that the seller, you're telling the seller great news. I'm going to show you every offer, even after under contract, because it's going to make sure we're putting you in a better position. That's the point of making your contract stronger than everybody else. The fact that you understand your contracts and you're telling your contract how you're utilizing this contract to help you put them in a better position. Because if you just send them a contract and have them sign it, you're just like everybody else, right? But when you're explaining why you're doing these things and how you've elected for them to sign these things, and you're doing it for what the specific reason is for, now you are 3 steps above everybody else. Does that make sense? So this is why not only am I recommending you do certain things, I'm recommending that you share with the seller why you're recommending that and ask them, do they feel comfortable with that? How do you agree with that? What are your thoughts on that? Because when it comes up, the seller will know you've done it and they'll know why you did it. And that's the power right there. Okay, everybody clear on that one? So when you're getting a kickout clause, you cannot even have a kickout clause unless you did not check that box. Because if you check that box, you're now in contradiction to your listing agreement. Does that make sense? So here's the thing. If you actually had a kickout clause and you had checked the box saying you were not going to allow for backup offers, I mean, could you be sued? You could be. I'm not saying that it could ever get to that level, but it could. I mean, we are in the state of Florida, right? And there are a lot of lawsuits. So I'm just saying you got to be very careful about all this stuff, right? So that's that. Now, then it says, let's say everything is good. You're accepting backup offers. You're going to put your offer pending. You're going to say, we're going to continue to show the property. And that means you can have all sorts of open houses, broker opens. You can continue to do all of that because you are still able to actively market this property. Now, even though you have a contract on it, and you certainly can tell the other party because they'll know they have a kickout clause. Now, once you get a backup offer, you're going to black out the party's identification, purchase price information, and then you're going to give the contract, or part of it at least, to show that this is a real contract, to the backup offer. And at that time, the buyer will make an additional deposit of a certain amount. Now, to me, this number is not very important. The important part is what follows. You do want to have something, right? But what's important is now the buyer has to waive all contingencies for financing and sale of buyer's property. That's what's important. They have 3 days to make this election. If they choose 3 days, if they don't want to, then they will get their money back and the backup contract will go into first position. So in order to go ahead and continue with this, you have to do a backup addenda. So when you're in a contract, you fully execute the contract, and then he would actually do a backup addenda. So you have to do a backup addenda rider right here. So with the new contract, you write a backup contract addenda. Because this way, this says that as soon as they receive this, now the buyer who was in backup position will automatically, the day they receive notice that the other contract has fallen out, they are now in first position. That day becomes the effective date. And whatever was written on the contract that they had, this now becomes the effective date, and everything that you've already executed here will take over and go into first position. Everybody clear on that? So this is what's really cool about this. However, they also have a right, which they put in here, that this contract, if this contract is not executed by this date, this is now removed and they're no longer a backup contract. So if they said, you know what, I'm willing to try this until March 31st. Well, if this doesn't fall through by March 31st, their backup offer is dead. They don't have to worry about it anymore. That's what that date is for right here. Y'all with me on that? So they can end if anytime prior to the date that the first contract falls out, they can always call this due. So they can always say, my backup offer is now withdrawn. And now they're out of the contract. So they can always withdraw their backup offer prior to either this date or the time that the first offer falls through. Everybody clear on that? So, but in order to truly have a backup offer, you have to have a fully executed contract along with this backup contract addenda. If you don't have those things, you don't have a backup offer. You have hope and pie and dreams and daisies. None of that is true. You know, I've had people say, oh, I'm in backup. Okay, where's the contract? Well, they said they'll call me. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, no, that's not a backup contract. That's you wishful thinking. Yeah, no. Yeah, especially if it was a good deal, you're out of luck. Probably missed that one. And it's not usually malice. It's usually that they don't know what the heck they're doing. I'll give you that. But no, this is the real way to do contracts. And you actually have to have the backup addenda, and you actually have to have a fully executed contract. Clear on that, guys? Okay. So those are two of my favorites. So that kick out clause, love that.
Carrie,
And
can you give some reasons as to why to use the kick out clause, other than obviously if they're contingent upon selling their property, let's say?
that's
Other
really
than
the only reason, thanks, Marima, to use a kick out clause. You see, because that's the whole thing. The kick out clause, that's the point of it. That's why I don't really care about the extra deposit. It's really because it waives not just the financing contingency, but the sale of buyer's property. So if you just said, okay, well, we'll waive the sale of buyer's property, it doesn't matter. Probably 9 out of 10 people who have the sale of buyer's property will also not be able to receive financing if they didn't sell the home, right? So if they said, okay, well, we'll just waive and if they write these things themselves, which, dear God, I see all the time, scares me. They say, oh, a buyer has a home to sell, which will sell by such and such date, and if it doesn't, they can get out of the contract or something like that. Well, it doesn't really matter, because if that ends, they're not going to get financing. And if they have a financing contingency that carries on, they're covered by that. So see the problem? So what's happened is the seller has taken their home off the market, essentially put it on layaway, right? And they're just sitting there waiting and put their life on hold. And that other buyer can get their money back all the way to the end of the financing period, which I've seen all the way to closing, which could be 2 months. They've made the financing contingent to go all the way 2 months or 3 months or however long they put the home on hold. So this is why the kickout clause, the whole benefit of the kickout clause. It's not this extra deposit. That's just to say you need more skin in the game. That's why this, you don't have to put a lot of money down here. This is just the little extras. It could be $500, could be $1,000. I don't really care so much about that. It's the beauty that you're waiving, you're pulling the rug out from underneath them. Did I say that? But you are taking away their security blanket. You're saying, oh, but I will say here, definitely take more money here if you have not taken a good deposit. For me, if you're taking a home off the market and putting it on layaway because you got a home to sell, you better take a good initial deposit. So that's a good point. So if you are taking a home to sell and it's going to take, I don't know, 2 months, if you didn't take a good deposit here, that's your bigger issue. You follow me? So that, because the kickout clause isn't going to save you, it only saves you if you have a backup, right? But here is the bigger thing, because you want to make sure that they have a chance to get money for, this is like the reward, right? For sticking it out. They need a reward for sticking it out if the person doesn't close, and they need to have a chance of a window of getting that money. So if the person who is putting their home on layaway is protected all the way to closing, those poor sellers have to realize they just took their home off the market for nothing. All the way to closing, they never had a chance of even getting that money. That prize at the end or selling, that's their two options, right? The seller has, hopefully they all want to close, like, right? But if it doesn't close, they should be able to get something. But you take that away if you get financing contingency to the end. Does that make sense? Whereas the buyer, they have their cake and they eat it too, because they're covered all the way to the closing. So whoever you're representing, you got to understand that's not a win-win. That's not a win-win for the seller. I mean, would you want to take your home off the market for the whole period of time, get a chance of getting nothing? I wouldn't. Does that make sense? So, Mariah, that was a great question, but that's why that's really the only reason to use it, because it gives them a chance to get out. That's why here in the financing period, about 2021, I think it was, when they changed and they added, where's my financing? Right here. When they added the section that the buyer not only had to use diligent effort, but they had to notify the seller within the loan approval period that they received loan approval, or that the buyer on line 124 now has 3 days thereafter to cancel. That was finally something that gave the seller some opportunity to get out. Now, this case, the seller doesn't get the money, but at least they have an opportunity to get out. So if they had a backup contract, they could now initiate that backup contract. You follow me? But this was the first time I had seen in years where they gave the seller some control. Before that, it'd been buyer control. Any questions, guys? Okay. We're going to look at my favorite here, the as is. You know how much I love that one. Just because they're the exact same. And I want to take a quick peek and look at, I want us to look here. Under, where is it? Yes, let's look under buyer default and seller default. Now, I'm using it as is just because it's shorter, but they're exactly the same. So, in either contract, if a buyer defaults, if they fail to perform under their obligation. So, in an as-is contract, really, the buyer really is buying the home as is. That's what their obligation is. So if they come to you and they want to have all sorts of things done and the seller says no, they can cancel. But really, that's it. That's what the buyer's obligation is to close, right? It's not to, ask for anything. It's not to do anything else. It's simply to close the home. They have the opportunity. Their main things to get out in an as-is contract, right? Let's talk about that. Is they really have the cancel for any reason clause and financing, if they have financing. That's it. Y'all with me here? That's really it. And if they do not perform, then the seller has a few options. What is the seller's options to get at? What is the seller's options for buyer default? Anybody? The seller can seek liquidated damages. They can, right here, seller may go after liquidated damages for consideration of the contract in full settlement for any claims. They can also go for specific performance, right? So because the liquidated damages can be their deposit, right? Because the buyer has money in, but it could also be other things that maybe they made the seller shouldn't be in an as-is contract, but we've seen it all where they've done repairs or whatnot for the buyer and then the buyer didn't close, so they can sue for that. So they can sue because the buyer made the move quickly. They can sue because they've lost rental. There's a lot of things they can sue for, right? Seller's default. If for any reason the seller fails to make the title marketable, right? That is a reason that they're in default. Now, what is the buyer's chance? And that's one real reason. The other reason is sometimes the seller just says, I'm not closing, right? So really, those are the two reasons that the seller would default. They're just not going to close. So either they can't close because their title's not marketable, or they won't close. They just don't want to close anymore. That's really the seller's option, right? So what can the buyer do? Well, they can seek to recover damages or seek specific performance. So really the same things. But if you think about it, they have no money. They have no deposit from the seller. So their path is harder. Does that make sense? They have no escrows to go after. So, and to seek, specific performance is probably their easiest one. Breach is, obviously they can maybe try to get back inspections. They can try to get back things of that nature if the seller wasn't able to make their, their title marketable, that kind of thing. But it is a harder path because if the sellers suddenly found out that they owe all this money because they have back taxes, which why did they just find out? We don't know. Now you're trying to get, blood from a rock. So it is a harder path, whereas the buyer's path is easier because they have the escrow in the being held. But that is really the same pathway for default. All of those paths involve attorneys. So this is where we have to be very careful. And I've seen it many, many times where we all want to help a little too much and we sometimes get too involved. This is where if somebody comes to you, you have to pass them off, recommend some attorneys, and back away. You cannot get involved in this. This is not our job. This is not our fight. We did our part. Our part is the transaction, right? We're involved in the transaction side. We're in helping to try to, help them get the property, not in fighting to sue the other person. Does that make sense? So we can connect them to the attorney, and if the attorney needs us to give documents or things of that nature, but we sometimes get a little bit caught up in that, and you have to be very careful with that. Does that make sense, everybody? I'm going to assume yes, because you're all so quiet. It's just so painful, but I'm going to go with that. All right. Another one I wanted to talk about. There's the time is of the essence. There's the new FinCEN ruling. Here we go. Okay. The appraisal contingency, we're going to pull that up. This has been coming up more and more lately, which is kind of funny. Okay, let's look at a couple. All right. Now, when we look at the appraisal contingency, this has gone through a couple iterations, but we have one. And I still see people trying to write it in. And I don't understand why, because it's actually written here. Now, notice how long it is, guys. There's a reason it's super long. It's because the attorneys want to write in everything that happens, when it's going to be appraised, who it's going to be appraised by, what happens, what value it has to come to, when they have to give notice. All of those things have to be addressed. If you just say something about it being appraised by a certain value, it's not enough. Okay. So it's contingent upon the buyer obtaining at whose expense? At the buyer's expense, a written appraisal from a Florida appraisal on or before a certain date, if left blank, again, the stupid clause, 10 days prior to closing, stating that the appraised value is at least blank. So you get a price. Now, if it states that the appraised value of the property is less than the above value, buyer shall deliver a copy of the appraisal to the seller within 3 days. So this is one thing. If someone's trying to use an appraisal contingency, you get to get the appraisal. I think a lot of people are not realizing that. You get to actually receive the appraisal, and that's so that they can terminate the contract. That's really all. Or they can continue the contract. They can either terminate the contract and get their deposit back, or they can waive and remove this contingency and continue with the contract. That's really all this does. I still see confusion where people are worried about an appraisal contingency. All it does is it gives them a right to get out. Guys, they have an appraisal contingency in the financing. And so the difference is, let's just look at it right here under financing. It says the buyer shall make application for financing within, if left blank, 5 days, and use good faith and diligent effort to obtain a loan meeting the financing and appraisal terms. So see, the appraisal has to be in there. So the lender, though, this is the difference. The lender is going to determine that what they receive on the valuation will meet right here, the property satisfactory to the lender. So either having received an appraisal or an alternate evaluation of the property satisfactory to the lender. So why do we need an appraisal contingency? I'm gonna stop for a second on my share, and we're gonna talk about this for a second because this is still coming up. What do you guys think? Why and when do we need to use an appraisal contingency? Anybody?
If somebody's putting down 20% or more,
It's a good question. That may be a good time to use it if you're trying to give them an out. If you feel that they may want to get out and you feel that the home is overpriced but here's the thing, the question is always still going to remain. You need to ask the lender, what price does the home need to appraise for you not to give them the loan? Right? That's the question, because there's a lot of private bankers, there's a lot of lenders that they're going to be working with that will not give them the loan if the home doesn't appraise. Now, there's other lenders that will. They'll just say, yeah, just put more money down. You're fine. You're qualified. So it's really going to depend. Are they working with a lender that they've worked with for years that will not issue them a loan if it doesn't appraise, no matter what money they have? We all know those lenders. So that's really why we need to be talking to the lender. Now, again, if you're talking to somebody, for example, who is a 95.5, right? They're putting down 5% and the home doesn't appraise. Do we need an appraisal contingency? What do you guys think?
Probably not.
Right? No. So
No.
it's in the contract. But I'm still seeing a lot of people writing in verbiage, not even using the appraisal contingency, but writing in verbiage about appraisals. And it's kind of laughable because what happens is you can actually negate things in the contract when you write in stuff yourself. So I'm not saying it's you guys, but if people on the other side even write in, we have to be really careful because it's bad practice and it can cause issues within the contract. So just let us be very careful when we think and use appraisal. I don't mind. You can throw an appraisal contingency on every deal. It doesn't really matter to me, but it does freak the other side out. It's very funny. Everybody gets freaked out, but it is one of those things that we need to think about. But we need to be having the conversation with that lender. Does that make sense? As to what number does the home need to be at for them to actually not continue with the loan? That is really the question we need to have. No, the other question is right here, assignability. Seeing a lot coming up with assignability. So let's just look at it. The buyer may assign and thereby be released from further liability, may assign but not be released from further liability, may not assign this contract. So let me ask the question to my newer people that are on the call. Do you think if you're buying this home and you're not going to put it in a trust, but you're buying the home and then you decide to add, maybe the wife was going to do it and then she decides to add the husband, or you're adding someone to it for the loan purposes. Does it need to be assignable? Somebody who's not been with me, what do you think?
I think yes.
Very good, Stephanie. If you want to make one change at all, it must be assignable. You cannot leave it unassignable if you want to do any changes. So my recommendation, guys, is always to make it assignable. I like the middle one, of course, assignable, and therefore may assign but not be released from liability under the contract. But I will still let you know that people are very nervous about assignability. They just still don't understand it out there. So go ahead and let them know they may be putting it in a family trust or something like that. And people will feel much more comfortable with that. The other one that I want to talk about
Carrie,
is,
can I
Sure.
just ask? But if all parties agree, though,
Mhm.
let's say you check non-assignable, and then somebody wants to add their daughter to it. As long as all parties agree and send and sign an addendum to that effect, it's good, right?
You can change any contract because everything is negotiable, right? But then you're just coming out of contract. So you're 100% right, Janice. So anything is, for example, you can, in an as-is contract, which sadly is done every day, is common practice, you ask for repairs, don't you? All the time, right? But it's an as-is contract. So, to your point, as long as all parties agree, can you make, ask for repairs in an as-is contract? Absolutely, right? So it's not to say you can. You certainly can as long as all parties agree. But what if they don't, right? So we had a
Right.
situation, it was a $4.5 million deal. We were representing the seller. It was a non-assignable contract. The agent on the other side didn't understand what that meant. She was very upset about it. And the seller was like, listen, we can change it, but if we do, I want to move closing up. I don't remember if that was the term, but it was something. He wanted to change the term of the contract, which he had a right to do, right? Because she was trying to come out of contract. He wanted to come out of contract. And the buyer did not agree to what he was trying to change, whatever that was. So long story short, they never came to terms. So the buyer didn't get to make it assignable and he didn't get what he wanted. It was a very contentious deal, sadly. And, she's now going to have to pay to, well, it was a long time ago, so she has already, but she had to pay to re-record the whole thing in her name of whatever the LLC was that she wanted to change it to, which is, a costly mistake on the side of the agent that didn't make the contract assignable. So to your point, absolutely. Could it have been done? Yes. And had the agents gotten along better and, had a better relationship with everybody, I'm sure that could have worked out. But unfortunately, it hadn't at that point. So, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Contracts are always negotiable, right? So, yeah, for sure. The other point that I want to bring out too, which I think is really important, for example, another thing, and let me share my screen here. I love to talk about one that people fight about all the time is right here under special assessments. It's line 210 and 212 here. Special assessments, pay installments prior to closing and buyer pay installments after closing, or seller shall pay in full at the time of closing. And my answer is it depends on who you're representing, right? Because if I'm representing the buyer, I want the seller to pay everything. And if I'm representing the seller, I want the buyer to pay after closing. But in reality, what are the special assessments anyway, right? Because they don't even have anything to do with homeowners association or condominium association. It's really government imposed special assessments or some kind of public body. So there's probably no special assessments anyway. So, it's these kinds of little minor things that could be negotiated throughout the contract. But the problem is most people don't even know what they're really even for or about, right? And this is why it's important to understand the nuances of the contract. Like, for example, Shandy, we were talking about a home warranty. We included a home warranty here in her sale that she had, that the seller was going to pay up to $1,000 for a home warranty, right, Shandy? And we
Correct.
said that we would go ahead and include it. We mentioned a name. And her buyer's agent came back with a Builder 210 that they wanted, right? Is that the one?
That's correct. Hmm.
Now, anybody who knows a Builder 210, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you want a Builder 210 warranty? Because that's not really a good all-inclusive warranty that I'm aware of, unless they've come out with a new product that I'm not aware of. But, you know, a home warranty for a seller, builders use the 210 after their 1 year, a full bumper to bumper warranty, right? But the 210 covers 2 years electrical and plumbing and then 10 years structural. But we were trying to help cover the whole 1 year of appliances and I think maybe even the pool and all this stuff. Builder 210 doesn't even cover that. So this is where the semantics of stupidity comes in because people don't know what they're even fighting for. You know, he probably saw it in the builder world and thought, oh, that has to be really good. It's not good for what we were trying to use it for. It's good at a builder to extend past the 1 year of the bumper to bumper, but we were trying to do the 1 year bumper to bumper. Is essentially if you're trying to explain it in a way that he maybe could have understood, right? Shandy, did you ever understand that? I'm scared to even ask.
No, but I have a question if it's okay to ask, and it is
Yeah.
on the home warranty. Obviously, you saw from my text last night, he doesn't understand very much. But so I just want to confirm that we do have not to exceed $1,000. So there's nothing saying that we have to supply anything other than a home warranty that does not exceed $1,000. So we could choose a $300 package if we wanted to, correct?
You said not to
Okay.
exceed $1,000. And if he wants to use Builder 210, he can. He's an idiot though, because
Yeah.
he just did his buyers a disservice. I mean, that's fine. Builder
Yeah.
210, you want to do that. But then when they call because their dishwasher exploded and it's not covered, that's not on us. That's on the stupid idiot that they have representing him. You
Yeah.
know? And then
Yeah.
we can explain to him, I'm sorry that you had a moron who represented you, but you know, we tried to help. But he was an idiot. So, you know, we'd have to say a
Mhm.
little nicer, but yeah, that's just the reality of that situation. Yeah, because people don't know what they're doing. They think they know because they sold maybe one or two new homes, but we use that in the builder world to supplement what we are already giving. We give a 1 year full warranty. A couple builders, I don't know if they still do, give 2 years. But then the Builder 210 is 2 years plumbing and electric, 10 years structural. That's the point of Builder 210. That's what it's called.
Did he find a builder 210 that's paying a big kickback or something?
I think he's just such a moron. He has no idea what it even is. You should have seen the contract.
Yeah.
It's painful. Yeah.
Crayons? Was it written in crayon?
You know, is that what that was?
I think it was.
It might have been. I think so. And I think it had some like, chicken nuggets on there and some, barbecue. So, yeah, it was painful. So bad. Yeah. So most importantly, guys, I just want you all to be very versed in the contract, to know not only what it is, but how to use it, how to explain it to customers, how when you're working with your customers, let them know they're working with the best. And that's the most important thing because you are the best. Thank God, because I couldn't handle it if it weren't. Any questions? All right. Well, I am back and back from San Francisco and Berkeley, and I will be heading over to Dr. Phillips. I came in a little bit late off that red eye, and whew, so it's a tough one. But I will be heading over there, and I'll see you guys in a few. So have a great rest of your day if I haven't seen you, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Carrie.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.